Many are familiar with the tale of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, raised in the lap of luxury only to abandon everything in pursuit of enlightenment. His life is a testament, a profound proof that in spite of being surrounded by immense material wealth, the human soul yearns for something more profound. Born a prince, Siddhartha had access to everything his heart could desire. Yet, he was not happy. For him, the opulence of his existence was a golden cage that kept him shackled, away from the truth of life, the truth of existence itself. It was only when he left his palatial comforts and subjected himself to austere conditions that he found what he had been seeking: a sense of happiness that was deep, gratifying, and most importantly, lasting. The Buddha realized that happiness was not a product of external circumstances but a state of mind that he had to cultivate from within. You see, much like Siddhartha, we spend the majority of our lives in relentless pursuit of happiness. We chase after success, wealth, relationships, the perfect body, the perfect image, thinking that achieving these milestones will deliver us to the doorstep of happiness. We are led to believe that happiness is an external treasure waiting to be discovered. But is it really? Is happiness a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, a treasure chest buried deep under the sea, or is it a state of mind that we must strive to attain from within? The pursuit of happiness is a universal human endeavor. No matter where we are or who we are, our ultimate goal is happiness. It is the driving force behind all our actions, our dreams, our aspirations. However, the question begs itself: what is happiness? Is it a destination we arrive at, or is it the journey itself? And more importantly, how do we attain it? The answers to these questions may not be as straightforward as we'd like them to be. If we consider the current trend, it seems that happiness has become synonymous with material possessions. The modern man's pursuit of happiness is largely dictated by external factors: a bigger house, a faster car, a higher-paying job, a perfect relationship. But does attainment of these things guarantee happiness? Take a moment and think about the happiest people you know. Are they the wealthiest? Do they have the most friends? Do they drive the fanciest cars? Or are they the ones who, regardless of what they have, radiate contentment, peace, and joy? The idea that happiness can be attained from external sources is deeply ingrained in us. From a young age, we're taught that doing well in school leads to a good job, which in turn leads to a good life. As adults, we continue to chase this elusive happiness, always looking towards the next milestone. Get a promotion, buy a bigger house, start a family, and then happiness will surely follow. But does it? Does happiness truly come from these external achievements? It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that happiness lies just around the corner. That once we achieve this next goal, reach this next milestone, then we'll finally be happy. But what if I told you that the key to happiness lies not in the attainment of these external sources but within ourselves? What if, instead of constantly chasing after happiness, we start cultivating it within ourselves? As we delve into this journey, it's essential to remember that the pursuit of happiness isn't about chasing a destination, but understanding the journey. It's not about reaching a place where we don't experience pain, hardship, or failure, but learning how to cultivate happiness amidst them. What if we could change our perspective and start seeing happiness as a byproduct of living authentically, instead of something that we achieve by reaching certain milestones? So, let's embark on this journey together. A journey that will take us through the lives of great philosophers, their ideas about happiness, and the way our minds perceive and pursue pleasure. In the process, we might just uncover some profound truths about the nature of happiness and hopefully glean some insights on how to cultivate it from within. Consider for a moment a scene from ancient Rome. There, amongst the towering structures and bustling markets, a famed philosopher named Seneca once walked. Seneca, a prominent Stoic thinker, debunked the idea that happiness could be found through external experiences such as travel. He argued that no matter where you go, you carry your mind with you. And within that mind lies your anxieties, your fears, your discontent. Therefore, no change in geographical location can cure a troubled mind, nor can it bring about happiness. The key, according to Seneca, lies not in changing our surroundings, but in changing our mindsets and attitudes. This might seem counterintuitive in our modern world where travel is often romanticized as a means to happiness. We are often lured by the idea that if we could just go somewhere else, see something different, then we would feel happier, more fulfilled. While it's true that travel can broaden our horizons and offer inspiration, it's important to remember that it's not a panacea for our discontent. It's the mindset we carry with us, the lens through which we view the world, that truly determines our happiness. Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever gone on a vacation, hoping that the change of scenery would make you feel better, only to return home with the same anxieties and stresses you had before? This is not to say that travel is bad or unnecessary. On the contrary, it can be incredibly enriching. However, if we're constantly chasing happiness in new places without addressing our internal state, we may find ourselves in a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction. These ideas are not exclusive to Seneca or the Stoics. Other philosophers, both ancient and modern, have pondered over similar questions. They've dissected the human pursuit of happiness and its implications, leading us to question our understanding of what it means to be truly happy. Now, let's move on to a different school of thought. Picture an ancient Greek garden where the philosopher Epicurus taught his followers about the nature of happiness. He put forth the notion of hedonism, the philosophy that pleasure is the ultimate good and the end goal of life. However, Epicurus's hedonism was not a mindless chase after physical pleasures, but rather a pursuit of tranquil and sustained pleasure. He proposed that our desires could be categorized into natural and unnecessary. Natural desires, according to Epicurus, are those that are essential for our survival and happiness, such as the desire for food and shelter. These desires, when fulfilled, bring us pleasure and thus contribute to our happiness. On the other hand, unnecessary desires are those that are not essential for our survival or happiness, such as the desire for fame and excessive wealth. These desires, Epicurus argued, often lead to pain and anxiety when they are not fulfilled, and even when they are, the pleasure derived from them is often fleeting. This perspective is intriguing, isn't it? It forces us to question the desires we chase in our pursuit of happiness. Are they natural desires that contribute to our well-being, or are they unnecessary desires that leave us in a perpetual state of wanting? At this juncture, it becomes clear that the quest for happiness is not a straightforward path. It's a complex journey that requires us to delve deep into our minds and question our perceptions and beliefs. The notions surrounding happiness are many, varied, and often contradictory. This is where the study of philosophy becomes instrumental. It allows us to question, to dissect, to ponder, and hopefully, to understand. And so, as we traverse through the annals of philosophical thought, we find ourselves face to face with theories and perspectives that help us make sense of this complex pursuit. They invite us to explore our internal landscapes and question the external ones. To understand that the quest for happiness might not be about reaching a destination, but about understanding the journey. And most importantly, they suggest that the key to happiness might not lie in the external world, but within us, within our minds, within our perceptions, and within our attitudes. A concept that may shed light on our understanding of happiness is the psychological theory known as hedonism. At its core, hedonism suggests that all human actions are driven by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This theory, in one way or another, speaks to our experiences. We seek job promotions, we aim for wealth, we long for relationships, and many of us yearn to travel. But why? Is it not because we associate these things with the idea of pleasure, with the feeling of happiness? We've all heard the phrase, "Follow your bliss," or "Do what makes you happy." These statements are fundamentally hedonistic in nature, encouraging us to steer our lives in the direction of experiences that yield pleasure. But how often do we pause to question what this pleasure really means? Is it a momentary high, a fleeting spike in joy, or is it something deeper, more lasting? Delving deeper into the complexity of hedonism, we encounter the philosophy of Epicurus. Despite his philosophy being synonymous with hedonism, it's crucial to note that his understanding of pleasure was much more nuanced. Epicurus proposed that pleasure is indeed the highest good and the end goal of life. However, he differentiated between different types of pleasures and desires. Epicurus classified desires into two categories: natural and necessary desires, and unnatural and unnecessary ones. The natural and necessary desires are those linked to basic needs like hunger and thirst, those that aid in our survival and those that lead to happiness. Fulfilling these desires leads to a state of peace and tranquility, which Epicurus termed as ataraxia, the highest form of happiness according to him. On the other hand, the unnatural and unnecessary desires include desires for power, wealth, fame, and other luxuries. These desires, Epicurus argued, do not lead to true happiness. Instead, they often result in restlessness and dissatisfaction as they are insatiable and endless. The pleasure derived from fulfilling these desires is short-lived, and we soon find ourselves yearning for more. This understanding of pleasure and desire raises some important questions about our pursuit of happiness. Are we, in our pursuit of happiness, misdirecting our energies towards the fulfillment of unnecessary desires? Are we entangling ourselves in an endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, mistaking it for the pursuit of happiness? To further understand the complexity of our happiness, let's turn our attention to a modern psychological concept, the hedonic treadmill theory. This theory posits that our level of happiness, over time, remains relatively stable despite experiencing significant positive or negative events. In support of this theory, a study was conducted that examined the happiness levels of two groups, lottery winners and accident victims. The results were astonishing. After an initial increase in happiness, the lottery winners' level of happiness eventually returned to their baseline, to the level before they had won the lottery. Similarly, the accident victims, after an initial dip in happiness, reverted back to their baseline happiness level over time. This study and the hedonic treadmill theory at large challenge our typical notions of happiness. They suggest that our constant chase for more money, more success, more anything, might not necessarily lead to long-lasting happiness. Our happiness level seems to have a set point, like a thermostat, and we eventually return to that set point regardless of what happens in our life. This realization is both liberating and unsettling. It releases us from the relentless pursuit of more and invites us to focus more on the present, on finding contentment in what we have. Yet, it's unsettling to think that our joy upon achieving a long-held goal or our despair in the face of a tragedy is temporary and that we'll soon return to our usual state. It seems that our pursuit of happiness is caught in the crossfire of desire and discontent. We are perpetually running on a hedonic treadmill, chasing after pleasures and running away from pain, often without realizing that this very chase might be fostering our unhappiness. This, arguably, is one of the biggest ironies of life. As we strive for happiness, we might be sowing the seeds of our own discontent. Our society, in many ways, pushes us towards this relentless pursuit of pleasure, often through the channels of consumerism and material wealth. The message that's often conveyed to us is that to be happy, we need to have more. We need to own the latest gadgets, drive the fanciest cars, live in luxurious houses, and wear high-end fashion. This message, subtle or explicit, is echoed everywhere, from our social media feeds to billboards on the streets. Consumerism, on the surface, seems to promise a pathway to happiness. It offers us an array of shiny, new things to acquire, each one supposedly better than the last, each one supposedly bringing us closer to the coveted state of happiness. But does it really? Or is it a mirage that lures us into a cycle of pleasure and disappointment? Think about it. You buy a new smartphone, and it brings you joy. You're excited about its sleek design, its advanced features, and its fast speed. But over time, that excitement fades. The phone is no longer new, no longer the best in the market. So, you start yearning for a newer model, believing that it'll bring you the joy that the old one no longer does. And thus, the cycle continues. You're constantly chasing after the next big thing, the next source of pleasure, always on the lookout for something better, something more. This mindset extends beyond material possessions. We strive for better jobs, better relationships, better bodies, better lifestyles, always under the impression that the next achievement, the next milestone will make us happier. We're running on a hedonic treadmill, constantly moving but never really reaching the destination of lasting happiness. The pursuit of happiness becomes a pursuit of more, a never-ending journey where the goalposts keep shifting. And in this pursuit, we often lose sight of the joy in the journey itself. The simple pleasures of life, a beautiful sunset, a hearty meal, a good book, a hug from a loved one, get overshadowed by our quest for more. We're so focused on the future, on what's next, that we often miss out on the happiness available to us in the present moment. Another perspective to consider is the Stoic philosophy, which cautions us against relying on external sources for our happiness. The Stoics believed that happiness is not found in the material world but within ourselves. They argued that external circumstances, wealth, success, fame, are volatile and unreliable, and so is the happiness derived from them. True happiness, they proposed, comes from inner peace, from accepting life as it is, and from focusing on things within our control. German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer took an even more pessimistic view. He proposed that pleasure is merely the fleeting absence of pain and that our constant desire and striving lead to unhappiness. According to him, the cycle of desire and fulfillment is essentially a cycle of pain and relief, with moments of pleasure being nothing more than brief pauses in an otherwise painful existence. These perspectives paint a sobering picture of our pursuit of happiness. They challenge the idea that more is better, that happiness lies in the external world, and that pleasure is the ultimate goal. They invite us to question our beliefs about happiness, to reflect on our sources of pleasure, and to rethink our approach to seeking joy. If we step back and look at the broader picture, we can see a pattern. Our pursuit of happiness often takes the form of a cycle. We seek pleasure, we find it, we enjoy it, but then we adapt to it, we get bored of it, and we start seeking a new source of pleasure. This cycle, while it promises happiness, often leaves us feeling discontented, always longing for more, always chasing after the next high. So, how do we break out of this cycle? How do we find a lasting, reliable source of happiness? One potential path lies in aestheticism and intellectual pleasure. We can find joy in the appreciation of beauty, in art, in nature, in everyday life. We can derive satisfaction from intellectual pursuits, learning, creating, solving problems. These sources of pleasure, unlike material possessions or social status, are not finite. They do not wear out or become obsolete. They offer a richness, a depth of experience that can nourish our souls and bring us lasting joy. But perhaps, the simplest and most easily attainable approach to happiness is to focus on the pleasures readily available to us and to enjoy them in moderation. It's about appreciating what we have instead of constantly longing for more. It's about finding joy in the present moment, in the simple, everyday experiences. It's about understanding that happiness is not a destination to reach, but a journey to savor. The concept of the hedonic treadmill further supports this idea about happiness and pleasure. The term, coined by Brickman and Campbell in their 1971 study, refers to the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. Consider, for instance, a person who has just won the lottery, an event that many of us believe would bring us immense and enduring happiness. However, studies show that after a while, lottery winners return to their baseline level of happiness. The initial thrill and excitement wear off, and they adapt to their new financial status and the pleasures it affords. Similarly, victims of accidents or tragedies, while experiencing a significant dip in their happiness immediately after the incident, also return to their normal level of happiness over time. This phenomenon is known as hedonic adaptation. You see, humans have this unique ability to adapt to their circumstances, both good and bad. While this adaptability helps us survive and function in a wide range of environments and situations, It also means that the pleasure we derive from our achievements or possessions often diminish over time. We get used to the good things in our life, they become our new normal, and we start taking them for granted. And so, the happiness they bring us decreases, leading us to seek new sources of pleasure. This hedonic treadmill theory is a key reason why the pursuit of happiness often feels like a never-ending race. We're constantly chasing after the next big thing, believing that it will bring us the happiness that the previous one didn't. But each time we reach a new milestone, our expectations and aspirations adjust upwards, and we're left feeling just as unsatisfied as before. It's like trying to reach the horizon. No matter how far you travel, the horizon keeps moving further away. You might enjoy the journey for a while, but eventually, you'll start feeling tired, frustrated, perhaps even disillusioned. And yet, society keeps telling us to keep running, to keep pursuing the horizon, to keep seeking more pleasure and more happiness. But the question is this really the path to happiness? Is this constant striving, this relentless pursuit of pleasure, the best way to achieve a fulfilling and joyful life? Or is it a recipe for stress, disappointment, and even despair? Let's look at it from a different perspective. Imagine you're on a treadmill. You're running at a steady pace, and you're feeling good about it. But then, you decide to increase the speed. You're running faster now, and it feels exciting, exhilarating. But soon, you start feeling tired. You're running so fast that it's getting hard to keep up. And yet, you're still on the treadmill, still in the same place. You're working harder and harder, but you're not getting anywhere. You're not making any real progress. And this is what the pursuit of happiness often feels like. We're running on a hedonic treadmill, striving for more pleasure, working harder and harder, but we're not getting any closer to lasting happiness. We're not making any real progress. Perhaps it's time to question this approach. Perhaps it's time to step off the treadmill and explore other paths to happiness. Paths that don't rely on the never-ending pursuit of pleasure. Paths that don't leave us feeling exhausted, stressed, and unfulfilled. Paths that lead to a deeper, more enduring form of happiness. Perhaps it's time to rethink our beliefs about happiness. Will the next gadget or the next promotion truly make us happier? Or will they merely push us to seek the next gadget or the next promotion? Is happiness really about having more, or is it about being more? Is it about acquiring more possessions, or is it about cultivating more gratitude, more kindness, more compassion? Perhaps it's time to redefine our idea of success. Is success about reaching the top of the ladder, or is it about enjoying the climb? Is it about earning more money, or is it about making more of a difference? Is it about achieving our goals, or is it about growing and learning along the way? Perhaps it's time to shift our focus. Instead of constantly chasing after happiness, perhaps we could choose to create it. Instead of waiting for the perfect circumstances, perhaps we could find joy in the present moment. Instead of seeking pleasure in the external world, perhaps we could find it within ourselves. Because at the end of the day, happiness is not a destination, it's a journey. And it's a journey that starts with us, with our thoughts, our attitudes, our actions. It starts with our decision to step off the hedonic treadmill and to create our own path towards happiness. A path that honors our individuality, our values, our dreams. A path that leads to a fulfilling, joyful, and meaningful life. Let's pause for a moment and consider the societal pressures we face. We are often encouraged to seek happiness through the accumulation of wealth, possessions, and status. We are led to believe that the latest smartphone, the fanciest car, the most luxurious vacation, the highest paying job, these are the things that will make us happy. But is this the truth? Is happiness truly a commodity that can be bought and sold? Upon inspection, we find that these sources of happiness are not only external but also transient. They come and go, they ebb and flow. The joy we experience from acquiring a new possession or achieving a new milestone is often short-lived. Before we know it, the novelty wears off, the excitement fades, and we're left longing for the next big thing. If you closely observe this pattern, you might recognize it as a cycle, a cycle of craving and aversion, pleasure and disappointment. You desire something. You strive to attain it. You experience pleasure when you do, but then the pleasure subsides, and you're left with a sense of dissatisfaction, a sense of lack. And so, you set your sights on a new object of desire, and the cycle begins again. Unfortunately, this cycle doesn't lead to lasting happiness. It leads to stress, to restlessness, to a constant sense of dissatisfaction. Because no matter how much you have, there's always more to want. No matter how much you achieve, there's always more to strive for. No matter how much pleasure you experience, it's never enough. It's never enough because you're seeking happiness in the wrong places. You're seeking it in the fleeting, the transient, the impermanent. You're seeking it in the external world rather than in the internal world. To illustrate this point, consider the metaphor of a thirsty traveler. The traveler comes across a mirage in the desert and believes it to be a pool of water. Excited and relieved, he rushes towards it, only to find that it's merely an illusion. Disappointed but still hopeful, he spots another mirage in the distance and rushes towards it, only to be disappointed again. And so, he keeps chasing after mirages, believing each one to be real, and each time, he's left feeling more thirsty, more tired, more desperate. This is what the pursuit of happiness often looks like. We're like the thirsty traveler, chasing after mirages of happiness, believing each one to be real, only to be disappointed each time. We're chasing after illusions, after false promises of happiness, only to be left feeling more dissatisfied, more restless, more desperate. But what if we could break this cycle? What if we could quench our thirst for happiness not by chasing after mirages, but by digging a well within ourselves? What if we could find a source of happiness that is not only internal but also enduring, not only satisfying but also fulfilling, not only pleasurable but also meaningful? You see, true happiness doesn't come from having more, it comes from being more. It doesn't come from gaining more, it comes from giving more. It doesn't come from consuming more, it comes from creating more. It doesn't come from craving more, it comes from appreciating more. This is not to say that we should renounce all worldly pleasures and live like ascetics. Rather, it's about finding a balance, a middle way between hedonism and asceticism. It's about enjoying worldly pleasures without becoming attached to them, without becoming dependent on them for our happiness. It's about deriving pleasure not just from the material but also from the immaterial, not just from the consumable but also from the inalienable, not just from the tangible but also from the intangible. In other words, it's about shifting our focus from the pursuit of happiness to the creation of happiness, from the seeking of pleasure to the cultivation of joy, from the craving of more to the appreciation of enough. Because at the end of the day, happiness is not something that can be found, it's something that can be made. It's not something that can be bought, it's something that can be cultivated. It's not something that can be chased, it's something that can be created. So, how do we cultivate happiness? How do we build this well within ourselves? The philosophers of the Stoic tradition offered some insightful answers. They believed that external sources of happiness are unreliable. After all, what comes can go. What rises can fall. What is given can be taken. It is the nature of the external world to be impermanent, to be transient. And so, they argued, if we base our happiness on external sources, our happiness too will be impermanent, transient. Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." Traveling, he argued, does not cure discontent. Our surroundings may change, but our inner state remains. If we are unhappy within, no amount of travel can make us happy. Instead, we must find happiness within ourselves, in our thoughts, in our actions, in our virtues. Meanwhile, the German philosopher Schopenhauer offered a more pessimistic view. He suggested that pleasure is merely the fleeting absence of pain and that constant desire leads to unhappiness. According to him, the quintessential human condition is one of perpetual striving, of ceaseless wanting, of never-ending dissatisfaction. And so, he postulated, the key to happiness lies in curbing desire, in mitigating want, in embracing enough. However, not all philosophers shared this bleak perspective. Some espoused a more optimistic view, a more constructive approach. They proposed that there are different types of pleasures and that not all pleasures are created equal. The philosopher Epicurus, for instance, differentiated between necessary and unnecessary desires. He argued that while unnecessary desires lead to stress and distress, necessary desires lead to satisfaction and contentment. Moreover, he contended that intellectual and aesthetic pleasures are superior to sensual and material pleasures. Reading a good book, listening to beautiful music, admiring a work of art, these are the kinds of pleasures that can feed our souls, that can enrich our minds, that can elevate our spirits. They are the kinds of pleasures that can bring us not just momentary happiness but lasting joy, not just ephemeral pleasure but enduring fulfillment. Now, if you think about it, this resonates with the psychological theory known as the hedonic treadmill. According to this theory, we humans have a tendency to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness, despite major positive or negative events in our lives. Winning a lottery won't make us permanently happier. Losing a limb won't make us permanently unhappier. We adapt. We adjust. We bounce back. And so, our happiness set point remains relatively constant over time. This is a profoundly liberating realization. It means that our happiness is not as dependent on our circumstances as we often think. It means that our happiness is not as contingent on our possessions as we often believe. It means that our happiness is not as reliant on our achievements as we often assume. Instead, our happiness depends more on our perspective, on our attitude, on our mindset. So, what's the takeaway? Happiness is not an external treasure to be found, but an internal garden to be cultivated. It is not a distant destination to be reached, but a daily practice to be practiced. It is not a fleeting pleasure to be chased, but a lasting joy to be nurtured. To sum up, let us reframe our pursuit of happiness. Let us shift our focus from the external to the internal, from the transient to the lasting, from the consumable to the fulfilling, from the illusory to the real, from the fleeting to the enduring. Let us not just seek happiness, but create it. Let us not just pursue pleasure, but cultivate joy. Let us not just crave more, but appreciate enough. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it has given you a fresh perspective on the human pursuit of happiness. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content. Remember, happiness is not a destination, but a way of life. So let's live it to the fullest.